All the secrets to the wide receiver position ahead of 2025. Perfectly crafted ranks and tiers, guaranteed to be 100% correct. Is that something you might be interested in? It's time for another edition of Way Too Early Fantasy Football Ranks from the fine folks at FantasyLife, a.k.a. your boy Ian Hartitz and Dwain, the Rock McFarland. Dwain, we're kicking things off with Tier 1 league-winning ballers. I squeezed in 6 separate, ballers into this tier. Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, C.D. Lamb, Puka Nacua, Nico Collins, and yes, our one true sun god, Amon-Ra St. Brown. So on the one hand, I could see the argument to just have the LSU boys, Chase and Jefferson, and their own tier at the top. I do think they deserve to, just be the consensus top 2 wide receivers. But truly, man, especially these top 5, with all due respect to St. Brown, I think any of these guys could finish as the overall wide receiver 1 in 2025.
Yeah, and Lamb just ran a little bit bad, this past season. Dealt with his own injuries. You lose Dak Prescott. That's obviously going to impact you. He was the wide receiver 1 in fantasy the year before. Young player still, in his absolute prime. So no debates on Lamb being in there. And I think that's where you could potentially make a cut of like top 3 and then go to the next 3. But I'm fine with having these guys in there. Puka Nacua has done it 2 straight years. Obviously, we had the downfall of Cooper Kupp this year. But he already showed that he could be a high-end target earner the season before when Kupp was still kind of doing its thing. So even if this is a team that moves on from Cooper Kupp, maybe adds another player that might be more target competition for Puka Nacua, we know he gets so much of the design stuff, Ian, around the line of scrimmage. He's kind of like in the Deebo Samuel role, plus like being a full-time receiver that gets to do all the other stuff, where Deebo just kind of gets to do that one part of his game. Puka gets to do that plus. So we know that McVay is one of these guys that's an absolute cheat code for wide receivers. It's not easy to do, by the way. That is not easy to do. For the most part, like wide receivers just have to be straight out ballers to go out and score fantasy points. But there are a couple of guys in this league at offensive coordinator that can make things a lot better for you. Sean McVay being one of those. I thought the interesting one, and this was a move for you since the mock draft we had, tell me your thoughts on Nico Collins, because I know he's a guy that we didn't really debate, but it's kind of a question. Hey man, should he be going higher? Once we had Stephon Diggs out of the lineup this year, 27% target share for Nico, absolute baller.
Yeah, I had A.J. Brown early on at the end of my first round here, but we are already adjusting the ranks here in January, Dwain. So yes, Nico Collins up there as the overall wide receiver 5. And again, just looking a bit closer at the rosters around the league, particularly a Texans one that might not have Tank Dell for 2025, obviously needs to recover from another horrific injury. Please, injury gods, take some freaking mercy on this dude. And also Stephon Diggs being a free agent. So even with those guys, Dwain, I still think we saw Nico emerge as really the wide receiver 1, CJ Stroud, BFF in that Texans offense. But man, without, we're talking about potentially 180 plus targets and, similar sentiment for all these guys. But we've seen the talent for Nico, and end of the day, man, one of only 5 wide receivers averaging at least 85 yards per game over these past 2 seasons. God forbid CJ Stroud gets back to looking a little bit more like the guy we saw in 2023. I think Nico can get up there.
Yeah, and we're moving on from Bobby Slowick. We know there were some struggles there. How quickly the world can change. A guy that potentially could have had a head coaching job the year before, now in a situation where just trying to find his next role as potential OC or just an assistant coach. So tough luck there for Bobby Slowick after running hot in year 1. So yeah, real interested to see what this team does. But obviously, I get why the Texans made the move. You're wanting to see more of what you saw to CJ Stroud in year 1 than what you saw in year 2. So a lot of this does come back to Mr. Stroudian, and I think that's the biggest question here. But the thing with CJ Stroud is I don't think any of us think that it's a situation where he's going to hold Nico back, right? Nobody thinks like CJ Stroud's like a terrible quarterback. It's just a question of like, hey, is he going to be more of an average middle of the road kind of quarterback, or is he going to be that elite, quarterback that we saw in season 1?
Last question I wanted to really get to with this, again, tier 1 of fantasy wide receivers is, again, another kind of thought about what if the quarterback performance could be changing, because with Puka Nacua, it's been incredible what he's done. He is literally the wide receiver 1 in terms of yards per route run and targets per route run among all wide receivers with 100 targets since 2015. It really is so special what he's been able to do. You mentioned, Dwain, the possibility that Cooper Kupp could end up being a bit of a cap casualty. We'll see if he's played his last down in Los Angeles or not. I agree with you. Sean McVay scheming things up is going to be great, but let's face it, From Calvin Johnson to Golden Tate to Cooper Kupp and now to Puka Nacua, Matthew Stafford, one of the biggest, fantasy wide receiver whisperers out there. And there have been some murmurs if he could be, looking to embrace retirement. So they played so well this year, I'd be kind of surprised if he's not back. But let's say, Dwain, that Stafford is also done as a Ram. Do you think Puka's just ability to thrive after the catch and get these scheme targets would be, just unique enough that he could still thrive with a lesser quarterback under center?
Yeah, I think the targets are still going to come, but the quality of target matters, right? Yards per route run, something that we like to look at for future fantasy production. It is impacted by quarterback play. So like targets are the easiest thing to look at and talk about wide receiver skill. And the reason why is because like even a bad quarterback knows to get it to their good players. It's just a matter of, can they do it accurately? Can they do it in time to allow like the fullness of the play to unfold for a guy like Puka Nacua? So yeah, we would have to see if Matthew Stafford did decide to take that path, who is going to replace him. And it could be a situation where we move Puka down to the bottom of this tier, potentially to the top of the next tier, just depending on what type of step down from Stafford we think we're dealing with. Now, we've seen guys. We saw Malik Neighbors, when we talk about him in a minute, overcome terrible quarterback play. Saw Brian Thomas Jr. do it at the end of this year. But it's not an equal thing where this always works out. Like if you end up with a quarterback that can barely throw for 200 yards per game, it's going to impact your performance. And we did see that even with Malik Neighbors, man. I get it. Started fast, finished really strong, but there was a middle portion of the season there. Now, he was also dealing with injuries, but you saw the impacts of the bad quarterback play. And he was a guy that went from being a high-end wide receiver 1 early in the year to a guy that was more like a borderline wide receiver 2. And that came back mostly to the quarterback play. So we'll have to see. Like, it's just a matter of how big of a downgrade would we be talking about from Stafford? Hopefully, Stafford decides he's going to return, though.
Last guy in the tier is, again, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Don't think we have anything, too big to say about the Detroit Lions offense. Obviously, do need to adjust to life after Ben Johnson. But just wanted to give the Sun God, a shout out for leading all wide receivers in terms of EPA per target last year. And Dwain, a cool, newer stat from NFL Next Gen. Catch rate over expected. Again, Sun God was number 1. Can you name, Dwain, the worst wide receiver in catch rate over expected last year?
It's got to be someone that had a deep average depth of target would be my guess. Is it somebody like that?
It's a trendy fantasy name, not maybe a little Butterfingers induced.
A little Butterfingers induced? I don't know. Who is it?
Dontavian Wicks. So I do think that kind of helps show that
Wicks. God, I should have known you were trying to trigger me.
Always, Dwain. Always look out for me. But yeah, guys, again, that was wide receiver 1 tier. Dwain mentioned Malik Neighbors, though. He is not too far behind. We're getting to him and maybe some other former LSU Tigers here right after a quick word from our friends over at DraftKings. Super Bowl 59 is right around the corner, and it is the perfect time to get in on the action with my partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. Right now, they're giving all new customers $200 in bonus bets instantly after betting just $5. This is your shot to make every last play a moment to be remembered. Don't wait, run, don't walk. Download the DraftKings app now and sign up using promo code FantasyLife. The crown is yours. All right, Dwain, tier 2 of the wide receivers. I titled it, Please, God, give us a good QB. 3 members right here. Got kind of teased the first 2 already, but yes, Brian Thomas Jr. coming off in this incredible rookie year. Malik Neighbors, similar sentiment, and Drake London as well. Not trying to throw shade at Michael Penix, but come on, we've only seen 3 stars. Not exactly a lock to be wearing a gold jacket by the end of his career. But we'll start things off with Brian Thomas Jr., Dwain, someone who we've seen some clips with Liam Cohen, being a very interesting man in some of his early press conferences, to put it lightly. But just again, reflecting on BTJ's incredible rookie season. In terms of yards per route run since 2015, top 5 seasons. A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Puka Nacua, Jamar Chase, and yes, Brian Thomas Jr. So pretty great company to be in. That said, we did see some pretty stark splits in terms of targets with BTJ before the bye and after the bye. That also coincided with Trevor Lawrence leaving the lineup for Mac Jones. Also coincided with Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram pretty much being out of the picture. So we do have a new scheme coming in. I would like to think it's an upgrade, but quite a few questions, Dwain, for someone who we do have ranked awfully high. That said, when you watch the guy play, just seems like the sort of talent we should kind of trust and, forget about these other small details.
Yeah, you just can't overthink it. Honestly, with Brian Thomas Jr. or Malik Neighbors, you can really put them in either order that you want. I agree with you. Like when you get to a tier like this, like the tiebreaker goes to the guy that we at least think has an average quarterback, right? And that's Trevor Lawrence. We don't know what we're going to have with the Giants. It could be an absolute train wreck. We did see Malik Neighbors get on the same page with Drew Lock late in the year. They seem to have a little bit of magic. So Neighbors has shown he can overcome, the bad quarterback play, but I would still want to lean to the guy that finished really strong. And we've got the new offensive coordinator, or the new head coach that was a great offensive coordinator for the Bucs coming in. We got the quarterback and Trevor Lawrence that's at least has shown he can support fantasy contributors to your lineup. So I do think it's right to have Brian Thomas Jr. at the top of this tier. The only thing I would change in this tier is I think Drake London actually belongs in the tier below. I think we're dealing with a bit too much of a small sample, in my opinion, for Michael Penix Jr. As many good things as we saw from Penix, I think we can also go back and look at a lot of negative things. Yes, strong arm, wants to put the throws in the window, but I don't know that we can be so sure about him. I mean, he there's a lot of questions, with Penix. And then on top of that, Drake London does not have the big playability of Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. So these guys have all shown they can earn targets. I think Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors, they are on a different plane, though, when you talk about the things they can do with the ball in their hands. You think about Drake London, I don't think about a guy that, man, just get it to him anywhere and he's going to be gone to the house. I think, get it to him anywhere. He's a good player. He's probably going to come down with it. He's going to give you size. He's going to box out the defender. But I don't think of him in the same vein as those other two. So I would probably go really with and I know it gets tough because you don't want to make these tiers too small. Making tiers, honestly, because you're thinking of the name for the tier, right? You're thinking how you're splitting these players up, and it determines a lot, like the way it ends up coming out. And sometimes you're like, no, I actually just want this receiver higher, but I can't give him his own tier. So I know the pain that you're going through because I go through this every year as well. So I think these tiers are really good. My one thing would be probably moving Drake London to the tier below, though.
There is a difference in kind of expected workload as well, because BTJ and Neighbors, these are the engines of their entire offense, not even just the passing game. Over in Atlanta, I don't think anyone's expecting Darnell Mooney, Kyle Pitts, or Ray McLeod to unseat London as that number one pass game option. But as we know, Bijan Robinson going to be racking up more touches than just about any running back out there. So it is a fair point. And with Michael Penix, you see the flashes. That sideline shot he hit to Kadero Hodge, and some of the throws to Drake London, particularly in that week 18. I don't want to call it a classic against the Panthers, but a pretty freaking fun game there at the end of the year. Had some high highs and everything, and that's fantastic. But overall, guys, just minus 4.4% completion rate over expected for Penix. That was the sixth lowest mark among 47 qualified quarterbacks. So again, just not exactly a sure thing just yet, just like the situations under center in Jacksonville and New York as well. But we'll say London, PPR wide receiver 9. With Kirk Cousins, and was up to wide receiver 3 with Penix. Small sample, be damned. I get it. Still someone that I would like to be betting on, even if, again, maybe should have kept the tier to the LSU Tigers, as Dwain said. But let's go ahead and move on to that next tier anyway. We are now talking about ballers with some competition. So, again, great wide receivers here. However, we are expecting them to have to share maybe a bit more of the workload in 2025 compared to 2024. So, wide receivers 10 through 14, I have A.J. Brown, Terry McLaurin, Ladd McConkey, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, and Tyreek Hill. So in terms of AJB, like Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert, we know what's going on here. Everyone that's watched the playoffs understands what's happening. Still a very great wide receiver, but in an offense with Saquon Barkley, only going to be so many targets to go around. So just keep on reading, man, and hopefully the good times will be going for Brown. Otherwise, though, I think the two big changes we could see, Terry McLaurin in Washington and Ladd McConkey in LA. I'd be shocked if these teams don't add some level of high target competition. And on the one hand, McConkey and McLaurin, very good players, are not going to disappear from the offense or anything. But man, talking about T. Higgins, who we'll get to in a little bit, someone who could wind up on maybe either of these teams. If you do add a legit 1A or 1B option in these offenses, how far could you see yourself dropping Ladd and Terry down the ranks?
I'm not going to get too worried about it. Like T. Higgins is like worst case scenario. But I think both players played well enough this year, especially Ladd McConkey. I love Terry, but we have seen Terry in the past when he's had more target competition. Mostly it's been due to bad quarterback play, let's be honest. But we have seen him, look more like a wide receiver 3, a wide receiver 2 in fantasy versus what we got this year, which is really a wide receiver 1. But Ladd McConkey, you're kind of going back to the stuff with Puka from last year. I feel like people are just going to try to find ways to talk themselves out of it. Like, he was borderline right there with Brian Thomas Jr. as well as Malik Neighbors. Yes, he was a little bit below those guys, but in most years we would be talking about Ladd McConkey being the best wide receiver of the rookie class. It just so happens he lives in a loaded class where we had so many good young wide receivers. So I just really wouldn't worry about it too much with McConkey. And I think there's a lot of room here. Like, there's no one else on the team that's really a good target earner. So you could add T. Higgins to the mix here, for example, and you could see 50% of the targets going to just Ladd McConkey and T. Higgins. And I think we also have the confidence in Justin Herbert to know that he can support two really good players like that. So wouldn't worry too much about Ladd. A little bit more with Terry, but again, still not that much because you got Jaden Daniels, man. Jaden Daniels looked great. I think there's still plenty of meat left on the bone as far as what he can do as a passer. Looks unfazed by anything. Ian, if they just decided they wanted to run the ball more, I'm not so sure that Jaden Daniels couldn't throw for 4,500, 5,000 yards. Like, I think that's easily in his range of outcomes given how he looked as a rookie quarterback. Again, 1 year, small sample, so not quite as confident as a passer as what we saw from Justin Herbert. But look, based off what we know and what he did at the end of his career in college at LSU, man, like, the sky's the limit for him. So I like the quarterbacks, so that lessens my concern. Really, then it just comes down to what kind of offense do they decide to run. If they decide to be more conservative, that can hurt you. It can make it tougher if you're going to be on a run-heavy team, even if you got a good quarterback and you're trying to divide the workload up between two guys. Honestly, the guy that's the most interesting to me in this tier is JSN. Like, Jaxon Smith-Njigba really came on strong this year as a target earner, did some nice things down the field, but overall his average depth of target still stayed low. Ian worked inside the numbers quite often. He and Geno definitely had some good rapport. I mean, talk about some stick throws from Geno to Jaxon Smith-Njigba, where honestly, dude didn't have much separation, but Geno just dropping dimes out there. Now you get Clint Kubiak coming in. Are they going to go away from 11 personnel? Is Jaxon Smith-Njigba going to have to operate on the outside against better corners more often? Is he going to have the vertical prowess to really scare those guys off enough to continue to earn some of those, I don't want to say complete layups, but there were a lot of layup targets also that they were scheming up for him. Now, they can still do that from the Z position, a guy working underneath. But JSN, man, liked what he did this year. Definitely an ascending player. Glad to see it. We liked him as a rookie, coming into the league. Didn't have a good rookie year, but we liked him, as a prospect. But I do have some concerns there in this Clint Kubiak offense, which is probably going to be more having a fullback out there, potentially multiple tight ends, less of the three wide receiver sets. I do think JSN has to take his game to a new level.
And it's the question we face with all these kind of players this period facing offenses that are changing with the play caller, OC, head coach, whoever. I mean, look, was that Saints experience with Clint Kubiak? Was that his offense that he's going to directly bring now to Seattle? Or is he a coach that is, again, going to focus more so on what his players do well, regardless of what team he's on, and then adjust the scheme accordingly? I would like to think it is going to be the latter, and he'll find ways to free up JSN in the slot.
My guess is with him, it'll be the first. I agree with you. Some coaches do that. With Kubiak, my leaning is no, it's not going to be the latter. I don't think it's going to be adapting it to the players. I think he's going to want to run the two wide receiver stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that he can't figure out ways to scheme JSM still within. Like, personnel isn't everything, guys. Like, the way you design the plays and all, you can still get him in motion. He did a lot of creative stuff with Rashid Shaheed this year that he could do with JSN. JSN's not going to beat you over the top, but you can still use that motion and those sort of things to get him quickly into space, get him open. You adjust the route tree some to really do the things that JSN does well. So I hope that he will do that. But I do think that JSN's going to have to be able to win from the outside.
JSN finished as a PPR wide receiver 9 overall last year. He was the wide receiver 40 in pre-draft ADP, largest jump, I should say, in terms of preseason ADP, up into the finish of any top 45 wide receiver. But speaking of dumps, Dwain, maybe it is going to be a bit of a situation where recency bias is getting to us, just based on everything we've talked about, man. And his name is going to be in one of these tiers we have upcoming. But maybe DK Metcalf is the better fit here if he's still going to be around. There's been some trade murmurs going on, but it does seem like Tyler Lockett has most likely played his last game in Seattle. So just straight up, man, JSN, DK Metcalf, do you see the potential, just disparity in ADP maybe being a bit too wide?
Yeah, I think it could be. I think it's a coin flip, in my opinion, on which one of these guys would lead this offense. And if Clint Kubiak does bring his same scheme over I think DK is the guy more fit. They're both good players. Like both of these guys are good players. So yeah, if it ends up being a scenario where JSN is, going way ahead of DK Metcalf in drafts, then, it doesn't mean I won't still want some exposure to JSN because he had a nice leap in year 2. Typically, that's a good thing for the trajectory of a wide receiver in their career. But yeah, I mean, I think that DK could be the guy that is the best fit, for the offense. We know he can play in 2 wide receiver sets. We know he can come out here and run the slant off the play action. They're going to try to induce more man coverage, things like that. DK has been a man obliterator over his career. Like it was always Tyler Lockett winning against zone. That's who Russ would go to. You give man coverage, didn't matter if there's help over the top or whatever. It's just like get the ball to DK Metcalf. And that's what he does well. So I do think that the scheme that Kubiak brings does force teams to think about the run more, thinks more about condensing boxes. You know what happens when that happens, Ian. You're going to get more man looks, or you get more coverages that actually really are, even though they're zone technically, the way the spacing and everything works, is still a man coverage kind of situation. And DK is really good in those spots.
And again, last wide receiver in this tier, Mr. Tyreek Hill, who, seemed like he wanted out of Miami after week 18. Presumably, though, has had those, concerns qualm just a little bit here, expecting him to again be Mike McDaniel's wide receiver 1 in Miami for 2025, hopefully beyond. And hopefully that risk is a bit healthier. And that could make this wide receiver 14 ranking look silly a few short weeks into the season. But many more wide receivers to get to, ladies and mostly gentlemen. First, though, a quick word to our friends over at Mike's Hard Lemonade. The Super Bowl is here, and for some, it is game time, while for others, it is heartbreak. But hey, guys, no matter how your season ended, Mike's Hard Lemonade is here to remind you that hard days deserve a hard lemonade. Tier 4, Dwain, we have number 1 wide receivers and good offenses. Wide receivers 15 through 18, Mike Evans, Zay Flowers, Cortland Sutton, and DJ Moore. So Evans one is a bit tricky here because obviously we have Baker Mayfield, I believe, now dealing with his 8th offensive coordinator in 8 professional NFL seasons. Mike Evans is someone who, look, if you look at the contract, technically he could be someone that maybe the Buccaneers can consider restructuring. I have a hard time ever imagining them actually moving on from this guy. I think, the fan base will be rioting out there, but Chris Godwin is a bit more realistic. It is a situation where he is entering free agency and coming off that dislocated ankle. We aren't exactly sure how healthy he is. So this is one of these situations, Dwayne, where, look, I have Evans wide receiver 15, basically under the assumption that Godwin's still going to be there, but God forbid that we do see Godwin, take his talents elsewhere. All of a sudden, Evans could be looking at a top 10 spot.
Yeah, I mean, Evans averaged 13.6 fantasy points per game in the games with Chris Godwin. Now, he still gave you some big booms, gave you 23 points in week 1, 23 in week 4, 23 in week 5. But, you had 7-point, 3-point, 5-point, and 9-point performances in the other games. So a little more hit or miss. We also have Liam Cohen moving on. I mostly am not worried about that. Like, Liam Cohen did some really nice things, especially for Chris Godwin. Like Mike Evans did his thing the year before and with Liam Cohen, so I don't think that really matters too much. That's more of just, hey, can Baker keep on baking, keep doing the thing that he's been doing? It's been good for 2 years, so feel good about the quarterback. We'll see what happens with offensive coordinator. But yeah, if Chris Godwin is out of the picture, man, obviously that is absolutely huge for Mike Evans. And if you knew that, I think you would actually have to adjust. I think if we found that out, we would actually have to adjust the ranks here because the dude averaged 20.9 fantasy points per game. Wide receiver 25, 3, 30, 3, 28, 5, 15, and wide receiver 3 performances. That last one is week 19, which means the wild card game, guys. You can see all that over in the utilization tools at FantasyLife.com. So Mike Evans, yeah, if we don't have Chris Godwin back and they don't bring in like T. Higgins or something like that, then yeah, I would say Mike Evans will have to end up moving up these ranks. I know it feels weird. Like Tyreek Hill, the ceiling feels like, look, if this was just a aberration this last year and the whole season just started off terrible, right? You're driving to the stadium in week 1, you get pulled over and thrown on the ground by police. You're in handcuffs. Jonnu Smith has to pull over and basically make sure that you can even get to the stadium. So it was just a rough year from the start for Tyreek. But man, if you told me Chris Godwin was gone, I'm at least taking Mike Evans over Tyreek Hill based on the guys we've talked about so far.
100%, man. And I'm with you with not overly worrying about who the new OC is going to be. I do think it's funny when we talk about, new players filling the X role in the offense. I was having fun on, Twitter, as I'm known to do sometimes over here, Dwain, talking about, Travis Etienne, the Bucky Irving role, because Lord knows Liam Cohen was the one responsible for Bucky breaking tackles at a better rate than just about anyone out there. Let's get Gabe Davis in the Mike Evans role. That's one of the stupidest things that, anyone could ever unironically say. Just for the record, I am 100% kidding with that one. But Mike Evans, again, a wide receiver 15. Right after him, though, Zay Flowers, Dwain, where when I was kind of trying to go through these again in my article, I have one cool fact for all these guys. Zay Flowers is that he tied for the league lead in terms of games with 100-plus receiving yards with 5, so that is cool. But then in terms of the offseason storyline, trying to find a way that these guys can bust, it was tough to find one for Flowers, man. Like, you're looking at it, the Ravens offense should have a lot of continuity ahead of next year. Doesn't look like Todd Monken's going anywhere. We're attached to Lamar Jackson. I struggle to see a scenario where Zay all of a sudden gets 160, 170 targets and finishes as a top 5 wide receiver. But man, I maintain this is a legit top 10 talent at the position. And just given what we're getting from Lamar and just from the offense as a whole, I don't want to rank Zay any lower than this, man. And I'm going to be drafting him a lot if he's going to end up around wide receiver 16 in ADP.
Yeah, the challenge for Zay is he's just stuck in an offense that can go so run heavy at any time. And the games where they decide to air it out, things go well for him. 26% target share as a year 2 player, but 29% average or 29% air yards. So like they're still using him a lot around the line of scrimmage. His average depth of target did get a little bit better. The thing is, to your point, like when you watch him play, you can see that he's actually a player that has the skill set to attack all layers of the field. They just don't always use him that way. So those are really the two big challenges. You can get in these run heavy game scripts, and then you also have these games where they're just, getting in the ball around the line of scrimmage, not letting him do more work down the field, even though he is fully capable. If those two things ever aligned for Zay Flowers, he can be a wide receiver 1. If those two things don't align for Zay Flowers, he can be more like a wide receiver 3. You're drafting him in the middle of all that as a wide receiver 2. He averaged 12.3 fantasy points per game, Ian. That was 35th in the NFL this year. So he was barely a wide receiver 3. That's very hard to do, man. With a 26% target share, to come out here and not be a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson, no shade, and not trying to throw shade at Wan'Dale, but there are guys that are pure just, hey, slot underneath gimmicky kind of guys. Zay Flowers is not that. Zay Flowers really can do everything. And to come out here and earn this many targets and play as well as he did, but to only barely finish in points per game as a wide receiver 3, it is telling of those two issues that I just mentioned.
Again, 2 more wide receivers in this tier. Joining Zay Flowers and Mike Evans, we have Cortland Sutton, who is actually the wide receiver 10 in PPR points per game from weeks 8 through 18 last year. Also, DJ Moore, who, ended up leading the crowded Bears receiving room in targets by a good amount. Now, presumably getting a nice upgrade with Ben Johnson running things in Chicago. What are you making of this new look Bears offense, Dwain? Because Keenan Allen set the hit free agency. Rome Odunze's rookie year, I get it. He had a lot of competition around him. Yes, we can just go ahead and blame it all on Shane Waldron and say it's going to be JSN all over again. And maybe it is. I just don't love when we do have a rookie wide receiver in Rome Odunze with some pretty damning efficiency stats. So more of a Fugazi for you, Dwain, or do you think, maybe DJ Moore is going to be a bit more of an alpha in Chicago than we're anticipating?
Man, this one's really tough. We'll have to see what happens, with Keenan Allen. If he's gone and we get this offense really condensed down to DJ Moore as well as just Rome Odunze. And, hey, Cole Kmet actually showed he could do a little bit before this year when he got completely forgotten. I think with those 3 players, I would feel more comfortable because we are still betting on a big jump forward by Caleb Williams, which is just not guaranteed, man. If you go back and you look at the history of quarterbacks, even when they're the first pick overall, of having, the struggles that he did in year 1. Now, guys, he did some really nice things. We've talked about it. He can make the highlight reel plays. He makes throws that maybe only Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes can make, on the move, escaping the pocket, buying time, all those things. The problem is he's trying to do that every single play. And he's passing up, some of the easy, things to keep his offense on schedule. That gets you into 3rd and long. Then you're going to deal with more pressure, more blitzes, things like that. So Caleb, if he can get out of self-destruct mode, Ian, that's going to be the key thing. I do think that's something that Ben Johnson will focus on. He's a guy that, did a nice job keeping the Lions, ahead of the sticks. Now, you had Jared Goff back there playing good quarterback with a loaded offense. So we really do need Rome Odunze to step forward, honestly. I think if Rome can take his game forward, Caleb takes his game forward, and we don't have Keenan Allen in the picture, I think you feel good about DJ Moore. This is a tough spot here where you're at. Like these tiers we're now talking about, I think it becomes really hard to start to break these players up. I think you could DJ Moore is one of these guys, like he's a good enough player. I think you could argue about him going 3 or 4 spots higher, but you could also make the argument of him being 5 to 10 spots lower in these ranks or in these tiers. And he's a very hard player to get your arms around because there are a lot of questions. He's a good player, not great. He's a good player. But a lot of things will come down to Caleb as well as just the way the offense overall functions.
And for the record with these, didn't include any rookies in the first, round of this. I know Ted McMillan is someone who could wind up going top 10. We have guys like Matthew Golden, Emeka Ibuka, that with round 1 draft capital, maybe they could be looking at that wide receiver 2 borderline. But again, it is January, so just didn't want to get in too far over my head with that. And also noting some of these bigger name free agent wide receivers, as we just discussed, Keenan Allen, but also Stephon Diggs, Chris Godwin, Amari Cooper, Deontay Johnson, if he's not, blackballed by the entire league at this point, wouldn't exactly blame them. Hollywood Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, and of course, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine really headlining that free agent wide receiver class. That is the one position where you can find some, legit ballers out there. I know they're getting a little bit longer in the tooth, but man, compared to quarterback, with all due respect to Sam Darnold, and then especially running back, wide receiver free agency, looking like certainly, the stars of the show, if you will, here come March. So again, just went through tier 4, and I agree with you, Dwain. Honestly, these next 4 wide receivers in tier 5, depending on who they're catching passes from next year, I could see, us ranking all of them ahead of DJ Moore and maybe some of these other guys sooner rather than later. So getting into it, my wide receivers 19 through 22, great wide receivers, but again, where will they be playing? Garrett Wilson, T. Higgins, Devontae Adams, and Chris Olave. So with Garrett obviously still under contract for the New York Jets and everything, but did have those rumors start to circulate at the end of December that he might not be too willing to return to the Jets if Aaron Rodgers is back under center. So Garrett, one of just 10 players in the Super Bowl era to gain at least 1,000 receiving yards in each of the first 3 seasons of his career. And yes, he did accomplish that in each season, even before playing that 17th and final regular season game. So I think we both agree, Dwain, that Garrett is a special talent. It was supposed to work out with Rodgers last year to a very high degree. That's why we drafted the man in round 1, round 2 at the latest. And we started to get that. But once they brought in Devontae Adams, the targets just weren't quite there. So what do you make of Garrett Wilson, man? Because it is one of these things where we've seen guys like Terry McLaurin, okay, finally get that great quarterback and then all of a sudden boost up the, just the ranks in their career. But with Garrett, are you starting to think that, man, we haven't quite seen it yet? Maybe it's just not there?
I'm not, but I will say he is like, if there's a name, and we've talked about this before, that he's starting to feel like that has done this to us before, it is Deontay Johnson. A guy that we know can go out and earn targets. Also similar build and stature to, Deontay Johnson. Really has to win with his quickness, not an overly physical wide receiver. Can separate against man coverage, can separate underneath, over the top. Not elite deep threats, either one of them, but they can gain a step, right, based off of what they do early in their route. They know how to set defenders up. They know how to settle down in zone coverages. Both of them struggle with some drops, right, that people get onto them about. So there's a lot of similarities between Garrett Wilson and really what we've seen from Deontay Johnson. And so if you wanted to give the cautionary tale, it would be, how long have we been betting on Deontay? He gave us that one wide receiver 8 season. All the underlying data points have always been there. But really, other than that year, it's never really been worth it to take him in fantasy. So I think that's the cautionary tale for Garrett Wilson. But then there's just, the other side of me. I'm studying this crap all the time. So are you. And, there are certain data points that really do lead us, for the most part, in the right direction. And Garrett Wilson still checks all those boxes. Yes, target share came down with Devontae Adams. But, look, Devontae Adams is one of the best target earners of the last decade. And playing alongside him, you still had a 24% target share, right? So that 24% we'd be happy with most wide receivers. And so I don't want to complain too much whenever you're having to play against across from Devontae Adams, and you can still do that. So I think Garrett's a very talented player. Honestly, I wouldn't be against a reset for him, though. Letting him get to a different place, different quarterback, different offensive, obviously they're going to have different coaching staff anyway there. Could have a different, all those things could happen just by staying a Jet, right? And they could also move on from Davante Adams. That dude's owed a lot of money over the next 2 seasons. I could see him being a cut candidate if they think Garrett Wilson is unhappy and they actually believe in his talent. So I think this is one of those where I think you were right putting him in this tier here. What you're doing, in my opinion, you're giving a hat tip to the talent, but there's a lot of unknowns that could move him up or down. If Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers are back, probably stays in the tier where he's at. You take a downgrade at quarterback and Davante Adams is back, he moves down. Davante Adams leaves and you upgrade from Aaron Rodgers, he's going to move up. So I think this is a spot where if you're wanting to draft some early teams, you can get some easy exposure to Garrett Wilson. He could move either way here, but not get overly committed.
When I talk about Garrett, relatively not achieving what we were hoping for, I'm talking about like legit Justin Jefferson top 5 level production, because I do still think that could be his ceiling out here. Yes, I understand relative to 95% of the NFL wide receivers out there, Garrett Wilson's still, certainly doing great things at the professional level. So mentioned Davante Adams, didn't have the hottest start, to that, again, just second homecoming with the New York Jets, but still wound up scoring the 3rd most PPR points at the position during the final 6 weeks of the year. Don't think, father time has completely come for him just yet. But the other 2 wide receivers in this tier, Dwain, T. Higgins and Chris Olave. With Olave, we've also gotten, some trade murmurs just because the Saints cap situation is so bad. They might not be able to give him that sort of, 9-figure deal that someone else is probably going to be signing up for. So who will he be catching passes from? Again, could be a difference between more of a low-end wide receiver 2, or maybe getting back to knocking on that wide receiver 1 door. T. Higgins, though, is the guy that we're going to be talking about, quite a bit, I imagine, over the course of the next month or 2. If he goes back to Cincy, man, I mean, he was a freaking top 5 wide receiver last year on a per game basis, even playing alongside Jamar Chase. If you wanted to try to squeeze him in the top 12, I couldn't call you crazy. That said, it's not like there aren't places where T. Higgins could go and all of a sudden we'd be looking at him like, do we really want him in the top 24? The Raiders, the Giants. I mean, there could be a floor here, Dwain. So T. Higgins, man, one of these wide receivers with a landing spot, I think is going to be just a bigger deal for his rank than maybe anyone else out there.
Yeah, I mean, he goes back to the Bengals. We're going to move him up, clearly. But it's not like he's been this every year with the Bengals alongside Jamar Chase. Now, injuries have always been an issue for T. Higgins. I know we are not big believers here in trying to predict the injuries. It's really tough. A lot of great Twitter, follows out there, a lot of great doctors and physical therapists, things of that nature that help us along the way. But it's still really hard, man, to decipher what's going to happen with injuries. But the other factor with the Bengals, if he goes back to the Bengals, is just the fact that their defense was absolutely terrible. Like it's a pass heavy offense with a great quarterback and great weapons that also landed in this perfect scenario where every game was a shootout or trailing and having to come back from behind. And that is what was a big thing that honestly, Jamar Chase can't win the Triple Crown without that, so there's these little things. Not saying Jamar Chase isn't incredible. He's an amazing wide receiver, guys. But what I'm saying is there's little things that happen inside of each season that enable like these monster blow up performances. And that was one of them for the Bengals. It's just how bad the defense was and the way these game scripts worked out. So they're still going to be great players in one way or another. It's just a matter of, do you get the same type of production you had this last year? That's going to be hard to do. And I do agree with you. T. Higgins lands somewhere else with a major quarterback issue. Like, he's not in the same tier as Brian Thomas Jr. He's not in the same tier of player as Malik Neighbors. As good as T. Higgins is, I think he has more limitations to his game. So I would be a little bit more worried about the landing spot, other target competition. But again, major hat tip, dude had an absolute great season this year and came out and just balled out. Best target share of his career. So look, T. Higgins, like nothing against him, but I think, again, the right tier here. We got to see what happens. If he goes back to the Bengals, that's my question, Ian, and he's going to be with Joe Burrow. They don't make many improvements on the defense. How much higher would you move him? Is he just move up one tier, or are you thinking more like a 2-tier jump?
I mean, I don't think I'm getting him up next to BTJ and Neighbors or anything that crazy. But when you start looking at him next to Terry McLaurin and A.J. Brown, I think you could rank him wide receiver 12 and not feel bad about it.
Yeah, that's where I was looking. The name Terry McLaurin, AJ Brown, those were sticking out. AJ Brown's a wide receiver one talent, like you mentioned. Everybody knows what's going on. They want to run the ball all the time. So it's interesting how all this works out. There will be some wide receivers that you avoid because you think they're on a run heavy offense, and they're the wide receiver 3 on the season. Other ones like AJ Brown, you buy into, and they finish as they finish outside the top 12. So these little things can be kind of crazy. But I'm with you on T. Higgins. If he's back, and we're not crazy about the defense, the other name that sticks out is maybe right around Mike Evans, somewhere in that 15, 16 range.
Top 15, I think, would definitely be the range that I'd be getting up to, and at the very least. So good stuff there in Tier 5. We still do have some names we want to get to in Tier 6, right after a quick word from our friends over at Bud Light.
Even if you score, always stay hungry. No matter how hard you football, it's easy to Sunday.
Tier 6, we have boom or bust studs, where again, for one reason or another, wasn't able to get them higher up in the ranks, but still do believe these are players that, given the luxury of, a higher end triple digit target total, could do some big time things. So wide receiver 23 through 26, we have DK Metcalf, Jameson Williams, George Pickens, and yes, Marvin Harrison Jr., someone who was knocking on the top 10 of these rankings, this time last year by more folks than not in our lovely fantasy industry. So it's already talked about Metcalf, a little bit, Dwain, and just, kind of his new situation in Seattle, obviously going up against JSN. But Jameson Williams, someone who, again, we saw what he can do, especially as just the downfield cog in this Lions attack. Don't anticipate, that role changing too much without Ben Johnson. That said, if they do decide to add, a more legit wide receiver 3 over the likes of Tim Patrick and Khalif Raymond, maybe that could knock him down these spots just a little bit. I'm more intrigued about George Pickens because in terms of like the offseason storyline to watch, it's pretty much like pick your fighter, man, because we are expecting there to be more incoming targeted competition. At a minimum, former second round pick Roman Wilson should be healthier. We're also probably getting a new QB. I mean, it's certainly a storyline we need to watch either way. And then also, Steelers might be getting a little bit tired of Pickens' antics out here. The dude looks like an MMA fighter out there on the field half the time. And as much as those highs are high and the flashes are great, man, we have seen, several wide receivers kind of work their way out of Pittsburgh from one reason or another over the years. So I think you're like me, Dwain, where I still do believe in Pickens as a high-end talent. But, man, wide receiver 25 here, I could see him finishing 10, 15 spots ahead of that. Unfortunately, I could also see him finishing 10, 15 spots below that.
Yeah, and it's something where you want to bet on the talent. So again, I think you've got him in the right tier here. You've got him essentially as a borderline wide receiver 2. I do think the ceiling is a low-end wide receiver 1. I think the floor is a high-end wide receiver 4. So I think, if you're trying to split the middle of that, I think he's positioned really well. I think that, it's similar really for a lot of the guys that you have in this tier. So when you look at, him versus DK Metcalf, they're kind of similar, right? I mean, they're big physical wide receivers. I think George Pickens so far has shown maybe a little bit more like as a target earner than what we've ultimately seen from DK Metcalf. DK's always kind of stuck in that 20 to 22% target share range. Pickens actually did show that he can be an alpha from that target earning perspective. He had 26% this year. And that's despite, to your point, there being challenges with playing time. And some of that probably does come back to the antics and things that you talked about. So do we really think he can expand his role? I don't know. Some of it probably depends on can he get along better, with his coaches, who knows? Maybe he gets along great with them, but we definitely know he does things that can irk them, especially in the games, and in the post-game press conferences. You never know what's going to come out of that man's mouth. So, there's a little bit of that going on, but the talent's there, man. You talk about Pickens, can win after the catch, not necessarily a burner, but man, physical, strong, stiff arm you, has enough speed to beat angles. Talk about a guy that can get open against press coverage, a guy that can beat man coverage, a guy that, is fine. Honestly doesn't get targeted quite as much in zone. If he was going to work on any part of his game, it probably is just figuring out how to manage that aspect. But Pickens is one of these guys, Ian, he is good enough. If you put him with the right quarterback and the right scheme and he just had his head on straight, I have no doubt he could give you a wide receiver 1 finish in fantasy. So I think you want to continue to bet on him because, again, guys, the talent is the hardest part for the wide receivers. There's just only so many guys that can earn a 25 to 30% target share. George Pickens on the planet Earth is one of only a handful of guys that can, 2 hands full, right? 2 hands full of guys that can actually do that. So Pickens is a guy, to your point, very the highs can be high, lows can be really low, but you want to bet on the talent.
Mentioned the artist known as Maserati Marv closing out this tier. I understand there were some big names didn't quite make the cut. Following tier, which is one, actually I should say, what was the tier called? Yeah, overqualified wide receiver twos, Devonta Smith, Jordan Addison, Jacoby Myers, Jalen Waddle, and Cooper Kupp. And then one, a big question away from skyrocketing up a tier, Rashee Rice, Brandon Ayuk, Jerry Jeudy, and Calvin Ridley. And then finally, more of the wide receiver threes, betting on a boom, red flag be damned, Rome Odunze, Xavier Worthy, Jaden Reed, Khalil Shakur, Deebo Samuel, and Rashid Shaheed. So plenty of time to still flush those out. And we will be doing so at FantasyLife.com, but felt good to get a good first crack at things. And you can find all those at FantasyLife.com. But enough of these way too early ranks, Dwain. Let's live in the moment and get another Senior Bowl update. That's right, guys. We were coming right back with our buddy Thor. Thor is back here joining us after an eventful day one at the Senior Bowl. I was, lucky enough to catch some clips on Twitter and NFL Network. But Thor, you actually have boots on the ground in Mobile, Alabama. So we thank you for your service, man. And would love to know who are a couple big time risers for you after, again, catching that first practice.
Let's start with SMU running back Brashard Smith, a converted receiver, now only 5'8", 195, and he didn't break out until this past season, but he was sort of the offensive driving force on that SMU team that sort of shocked the world by making the college football playoff. He is an extremely skilled receiver, and we saw that on the field in Mobile yesterday. He runs routes like the slot receiver he is. Now, what is Brashard Smith not? He's not going to do anything for you between the tackles. If you have Brashard Smith on your roster, you're going to need that early down grinder. But this is a guy I think is going to hang around for a long time as a passing down back in the NFL. Like I said, extremely, extremely skilled and a very good start for Brashard Smith.
Good stuff there. I know we were talking about, a couple different running backs yesterday. So nice to see Brashard Smith get into the conversation. How about LSU tight end Mason Taylor? Hopefully went a little bit better than Harold Fannin, who, I'm not a Dr. Thor, but got a little bit stiff out there.
Harold Fannin did not have the best start, the prolific FBS receiving record holder in Fannin. We'll see the second and the third day there. But yes, Mason Taylor was the tight end who stood out. With Fannin struggling and Gunnar Helm not at the event, we sort of needed that tight end to rise yesterday, and we got that from Mason Taylor. With his dad, Jason, the Hall of Famer, watching from the sidelines was pretty cool. And Mason's uncle is Zach Thomas, the other Dolphins legendary defensive Hall of Famer. But Mason Taylor is a guy, he has his dad's big frame and the athleticism in it, and he's extremely smooth as a receiver. You deploy him in line. He was really good at the timing concepts with Garrett Nussmeier in that LSU offense. Nussmeier would go deep to the wide receiving core, and then off of play action, the bootleg concepts. He always knew right where Mason Taylor was going to be. The breaks were clockwork, and he could put it on his hands. Very good transitions from receiver to runner for Mason Taylor as well. And yesterday in Mobile, we saw him make some crazy good catches. Jalen Milroe, the Alabama quarterback, was really struggling with his throwing. Mason Taylor bailed him out a couple times, including with a diving one-handed catch. Very good start for Mason Taylor, especially when you compare that to Harold Fannin's day.
Heck of an NFL lineage you had going there as well. Would be a fun little fit there to see him maybe land on the Dolphins. Last thing, I know we have an interview clip we want to get to, but Thor, you did mention Jalen Milroe struggling a bit out there yesterday on the Fantasy Life show. Talked about his smaller hands and heard there were quite a few, footballs hitting the ground there. So I'm assuming, day one, you're working with brand new coaches, a brand new offense. It probably is somewhat commonplace to see these quarterbacks struggle, but how rough was the Milroe experience maybe compared to the other quarterbacks?
It wasn't good. I will say that most of the quarterbacks struggle, and this is something that is endemic to postseason all-star exhibitions like this, where the quarterbacks, you're getting on the same page with these receivers that you're just meeting. Some of them, you don't know how fast their bodies move through space. You have to get the plays, the timing, all that sort of stuff. So you do see the struggles with the quarterbacks on day one of these events. But Milroe, in particular, the accuracy was wonky yesterday. But we need to see better these next couple days. What we will see for sure is his otherworldly athleticism and the arm strength. Yesterday we were seeing a lot of the more shorter stuff, and that's where the accuracy was errant with Jalen Milroe. But to your point, Ian, he needs to pick it up. That's a guy who could rally into the top 10 in April with a really good process. A bad process, he has no shot at going in the first round. So it is of paramount importance that Jalen Milroe turned things around here last 2 days.
Certainly just one practice, one piece of the puzzle, but hey, you'd like for those to be as, good as possible in an ideal world. So great stuff, Thor. We thank you for your service, and we especially thank you for a rock chalk interview. That's right. We got Kansas RB Devin Neal. Let's hear what he had to say.
Fantasy Life's Thor Nystrom with one of my favorite players, Devin Neal from the University of Kansas. I'm a rock chalker myself. Okay. I watch every snap that you played the last 3 years.
Yes, sir. 3
straight 1,000+ yard seasons, dominated in the Big 12. Now you're coming out here, your first day here at the Senior Bowl. How do you think it went?
I think it went well. Just being able to show that I can run routes well, and then obviously going good on good and getting some nice reps in, and adapting to an NFL pro style offense. And I just love developing. I love getting better, and I'm looking forward to putting another good foot forward tomorrow.
So you played earlier in your career with one of the best offensive coordinators in college football, Andy Kotelnicki. I'm not going to criticize any of your usage, but as a receiver, only I think it was a half a yard of ADOT during your career. When you were deployed further up, you can run routes and you can shake people in open field. You obviously have good feet. You have good feel. Is that the number one thing you're trying to prove this week? Is like I can show more as a receiver than I was using.
I think that was a question mark for me, just because I didn't have the opportunity to do it, and I've always been able to do that. If you go all the way back to my life, I played receiver growing up, so just being able to do that, being able to show that I can pass block consistently and do those things that is required to be an every down back, because that's what I ultimately want to show is my versatility on the football field. So I'll definitely go with that for sure.
There's not many 220-pound backs that have your feet. Man, your feet in the 220-pound package, your footwork, was there anything that you did to develop that?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, was that something you worked on, or is that a natural thing?
I think it's a little bit of both. Naturally, I've always been, the guy who's juking people out, just playing tag and stuff like that. And then, just developing that part of my game, I noticed I had a gift for it early on, and, I just wanted to keep getting better and just get better.
Last question for you. In NFL comp, okay, yeah. In NFL comp, there's people that have tossed out the highest end, Elvin Kamara, but on the way down, there's not many guys that have your feet in the NFL. Who would you comp your own game to, or who do you pattern it?
I like to mix it between guys like Joe Mixon and Travis Etienne. I like what they do, and I like to model my game after. Not necessarily that I have the right style for them, but I kind of comp myself as my own type of guy. Just unique, a unicorn.
I love it. Rock chalk, brother. Rock chalk. Yeah, appreciate it.
Great stuff there, Thor. And thank you to Devin Neal for the time. I love the note about him developing the footwork, playing tag as a kid. Thor, can we get a Senior Bowl, just, entire tag event going on there? That's what the people want to see.
Yeah, it would be fun to have that event, but it was fun talking to Devin Neal. And like I said, not many backs in the NFL that are 220 pounds and have the footwork that guy does. So excited to see him here the next couple of days as well.
I think I'm also just looking for excuses for Kadarius Toney to be relevant once again. We'll see if 2025 is his year, fun. But that will be fun. So, Thor, we thank you. You'll be back here tomorrow as well, breaking down more Senior Bowl goodness. And come up with some cool stuff, my friend. As always, you can find all of Thor's work over on Twitter at ThorCoo, as well as FantasyLife.com. So appreciate all you guys tuning in. For Dwain, for Thor, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for checking out the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.